When we think of classic Hollywood, certain names immediately come to mind. They're the legends, the icons whose faces practically defined an era. But Hollywood wasn't just built by superstars. It was held together by countless other actors, the steady, reliable performers who gave movies their texture and grit. They're the faces you know the second you see them, the ones who bring a flash of recognition and a sense of lived-in reality to the screen. They're the tough guys, the loyal sidekicks, the flawed heroes, and the unforgettable villains. They were, and are, the backbone of Hollywood. Richard Jaeckel was one of those guys. His face is etched into the landscape of American film, from the black-and-white battlefields of World War II epics to the sun-drenched shores of Baywatch. For 50 years, he was a constant, a symbol of gritty reliability. He worked with everyone who was anyone, from John Wayne to Paul Newman to Lee Marvin. He was even nominated for an Academy Award. By any measure, he was a success, but Richard Jaeckel's story doesn't end with a curtain call and a standing ovation. It ends quietly, with a legacy nearly swallowed by a cruel silence. This isn't a story about a scandalous fall from grace or some self-destructive spiral. It's something far more chilling, a story of being forgotten by the very industry he helped build. It's a story of personal tragedy so profound it feels like it must have been written in a script, and a final chapter that reveals the heartbreaking truth of what can happen when the cameras finally turn away. You've seen his face 100 times, even if you never knew his name. Richard Jaeckel was everywhere, in gritty war films, dusty westerns, and tense dramas. He was the man Hollywood called when it needed someone tough, reliable, and real. For over 50 years, he was the backbone of American cinema. But then, something heartbreaking happened. He didn't flame out in a scandal, he just faded away into a painful silence. This is the story of a forgotten hero whose final years are truly shocking. Richard Jaeckel's story starts like a classic Hollywood fairy tale. It was 1943, the height of the studio system, a time when dreams were manufactured on sprawling backlots. At 20th Century Fox, a 17-year-old kid named Richard Jaeckel was working as a mailboy. Born in Long Island, his family had moved to L.A., and after graduating from Hollywood High, he took an entry-level job weaving a delivery cart through a world of soundstages and movie stars. He had no dreams of acting, he was just a kid earning a paycheck, an anonymous face in the heart of the dream factory. But in Hollywood, sometimes destiny finds you. A casting director, hunting for fresh faces for the war epic Guadalcanal Diary, spotted the teenager. There was just something about him, a stocky build, a baby face that held a flicker of toughness, an authentic, all-American look you just couldn't fake. He was reluctant at first, but the studio insisted. He was given a screen test, and just like that, the mailboy was cast as Private Chicken So-and-so, a young Marine in one of the year's biggest films. His career didn't start in acting classes, it started in the trenches of a simulated war zone, a baptism by fire that would define the rest of his 50-year journey. Guadalcanal Diary was a huge hit, and Jaeckel's raw, natural performance made an impression. Variety noted that Richard Jaeckel scores as a downy-faced juvenile. He was a natural. But just as his career was taking off, he did something almost unthinkable in Hollywood. Instead of cashing in on his newfound fame, he answered a different call. In 1944, Richard Jaeckel enlisted in the United States Merchant Marine, serving his country from 1944 to 1946. It was a move that said everything about his character. He wasn't chasing stardom, he was a man of duty, a trait that would become the hallmark of his on-screen persona. When he returned to Hollywood, he picked up right where he left off, his military experience adding a layer of authenticity to his work. He became a go-to actor for films trying to capture the grit and valor of the American soldier. He stood shoulder to shoulder with John Wayne in the iconic sands of Iwo Jima and fought in the frozen forests of Battleground, one of the most acclaimed films about the Battle of the Bulge. He was no longer just the downy-faced juvenile, he was a seasoned performer who understood the weight of the uniform he so often wore. Throughout the 1950s, he became a fixture in another all-American genre, the Western. He was the cocky young gunfighter who tragically provokes Gregory Peck in The Gunfighter. He was the earnest Paul Curtis in Cowboy and the loyal Charlie Prince in the classic 3:10 to Yuma. Whether he was playing a soldier or a cowboy, he brought a grounded reality to every part. He was rarely the top-billed star, but he was often the most believable person on screen. What made Jaeckel so valuable was his unique blend of boyish charm and tough energy. For years, he seemed ageless, able to play naive young men and world-weary veterans with equal skill. But this reliability came at a price. It cemented his status as a character actor. He was seen as the essential supporting pillar, the guy you needed to hold the movie up, but never the main attraction. He worked constantly, building a staggering resume, but a glass ceiling was forming over his head. He was becoming one of the most familiar faces in America, even if nobody knew his name. He was just that guy. For nearly 30 years, Richard Jaeckel was the ultimate professional. He showed up, he hit his marks, and he delivered performances that were consistently praised. He was the definition of a working actor, building a legacy one role at a time. Then, in 1971, the moment arrived that should have changed everything. The moment that should have shattered that glass ceiling. And launched him from dependable character actor to bona fide star. It came in a film called Sometimes a Great Notion that the story of how he got the part is another perfect Hollywood tale. Paul Newman, the film's director and star, was at Malibu Beach when he saw Jaeckel, not acting, but just being a dad, playing with his kids. Newman was casting the role of his brother, Joe Ben Stamper, in the adaptation of Ken Kesey's novel about a fiercely independent logging family. Watching Jaeckel, a genuine family man, Newman saw the authenticity he was looking for. He fought the studio for him, insisting Jaeckel was the only man for the part. The role was a world away from his usual tough guy persona. Joe Ben was the heart of the family, funny, loyal, and tragically vulnerable. Jaeckel poured every ounce of his understated craft into the performance. The film is remembered for many things, but one of its most powerful scenes belongs entirely to him. His character gets pinned underwater by a log, and the sequence where Paul Newman's character desperately tries to save him is a masterclass in tension and heartbreak. It's a raw, devastating scene that showcases Jaeckel's incredible talent. The industry took notice. For his funny, tragic, and deeply human performance, Richard Jaeckel received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. After decades of being the reliable backbone, he was finally being recognized on Hollywood's biggest stage. It was the kind of honor that transforms a career. For any other actor, an Oscar nomination is a key that unlocks better roles, bigger paychecks, and A-list status. It was his turning point, but for Richard Jaeckel, the turning point never truly turned. He attended the 44th Academy Awards, a respected nominee among industry giants. He didn't win. The award went to Ben Johnson for The Last Picture Show, but the nomination itself should have been enough. It should have been the start of a new chapter. Instead, it became a bittersweet milestone, a peak from which he would slowly begin to descend. So why didn't it change anything? Because Hollywood had already made up its mind about him. Jaeckel was in his mid-40s and had been typecast. He was talented, he was reliable, but he wasn't a star. He didn't have the glamour or the larger-than-life persona the studios sold to the public. He was a quiet, humble man who preferred spending time with his family to playing the Hollywood game. His work spoke for itself, but in an industry driven by image, that's often not enough. After the glow of the Oscar nomination faded, he went back to being what he had always been, a working actor. The A-list leading roles never came. He continued to work steadily in films like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and The Drowning Pool, but the promise of that nomination remained unfulfilled. The moment that should have been a launchpad became a beautiful but solitary honor. He had been recognized, but he had not been elevated. The years after his Oscar nomination marked the beginning of a long, slow fade. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a gradual, almost invisible shift. As the 70s gave way to the 80s, Hollywood changed. The gritty, character-driven films that were his bread and butter were being replaced by high-concept blockbusters. The era of the dependable tough guy was ending. For a workhorse like Richard Jaeckel, the only option was to adapt. He found a new home on television. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, he became a familiar face in living rooms everywhere, taking roles in popular series like Spencer, For Hire and Super Carrier. But for an actor who had shared the screen with legends and earned an Oscar nomination, it was a clear step down. His most notable TV role came in 1991, when he was cast as the veteran lifeguard Ben Edwards in the global phenomenon, Baywatch. From 1991 to 1994, he was a regular on the most-watched show on the planet, playing the grizzled mentor to a cast of young, beautiful lifeguards. It was a strange juxtaposition: the Oscar-nominated actor, the man who had fought alongside John Wayne, now coordinating rescues on a California beach. The role paid the bills and kept him in the public eye, but it also showed how far he had drifted from prestigious Hollywood productions. That he took the work seriously, as he always did. But behind the scenes, the battle for relevance was taking its toll. The phone rang less and less for major film roles. The parts he did get were smaller, often just a few lines as a hardened detective or a weathered military officer. He was becoming a relic from a bygone era in a town with a notoriously short memory. He never complained publicly. He was a professional to the core. But the frustration must have been there. And then, his situation went from difficult to heartbreaking. Around 1994, those close to him noticed a change. The sharpness in his eyes started to dull. He was forgetting lines, seemed tired and frail. At 68 years old, after a lifetime of robust health, his body was betraying him. He was diagnosed with melanoma, an aggressive skin cancer. The diagnosis was a cruel irony. The son he had loved, the element so intertwined with his identity as a California surfer, had become his enemy. For 3 long years, he battled the disease with the same quiet courage he'd shown on screen for 5 decades, but this was a battle he couldn't win. His career came to a sudden halt. He was too ill to work. The slow fade had become a freefall. The man who was always there was suddenly gone. And in the silence that followed, an even more shocking truth began to emerge. The silence wasn't just on the screen, it was in his bank account, in his home, and in the heart of his family. The final, most devastating chapter of his life was about to begin. For an actor who had worked for 50 years in over 150 productions, you'd assume a comfortable retirement. For Richard Jaeckel, the reality was a nightmare. In 1994, the same year his health began to fail, he was forced to file for bankruptcy, revealing a debt of $1.70 million. How could this happen? This was a man who had earned a massive payday for his role in The Dirty Dozen back in 1967 and had worked non-stop for decades. How could he be ruined? The reasons were a devastating mix of a changing industry, dwindling roles, and the astronomical costs of his medical care. The safety net he thought he had built over a lifetime just wasn't there. The bankruptcy wasn't just a number on a page, it was the public dismantling of his life. The first thing to go was his home in Brentwood, the symbol of his success. Along with the house went most of his possessions, furniture, memorabilia, the tangible pieces of a life spent in Hollywood. At an age when he should have been enjoying the fruits of his labor, he was left with almost nothing. As Richard was grappling with his own mortality and watching his financial world collapse, his family was hit with a second, simultaneous tragedy. Tragically, his wife of nearly 50 years, Antoinette Marches, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They'd been married since 1947, a rare, lasting partnership in Hollywood. And just when he needed her most, she started to disappear into the fog of the disease. Antoinette passed away in 1994, the very same year Richard's health failed, and his finances collapsed. He had lost his health, his home, his security, and his life partner, all at once. It was a cascade of tragedy almost too immense to comprehend that in his time of greatest need, the industry that had profited from his talent for half a century was largely silent. There were no fundraisers or public outcries. The system had moved on. However, there were flickers of humanity. His old co-star, Gregory Peck, personally intervened to get him admitted into the Motion Picture and Television Fund's retirement home in Woodland Hills, a facility for industry veterans who had fallen on hard times. Within 3 days, Richard Jaeckel, the Oscar-nominated actor, moved into the home where he would spend the rest of his life. He spent his final years in a simple room, a stark contrast to the sprawling movie sets that had once been his world. He was surrounded by the ghosts of Hollywood, other forgotten soldiers of the silver screen, fighting his battle with cancer in quiet obscurity. Richard Jaeckel's story is a powerful reminder of the thousands of artists who dedicate their lives to their craft, only to be forgotten when the spotlight moves on. Their work is the foundation of our shared cinematic history, and their legacies deserve to be honored. If you remember Richard Jaeckel's powerful performances, please share your favorite role in the comments below. By sharing these stories, we keep their legacies alive. And if you believe in honoring the forgotten legends of Hollywood, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that need to be told. On June 14, 1997, Richard Jaeckel passed away at the age of 70. His 3-year battle with cancer was over. He died quietly at the Motion Picture and Television Hospital, the same place that had been his home for his final years. His ashes were scattered at sea, a final return to the ocean he had loved so much. His death barely made a ripple in the entertainment world. There were no primetime tributes or grand farewells from the studios he had helped build. His passing was met with a profound and telling silence. It was the final injustice for a man who had given so much. The story of Richard Jaeckel is a cautionary tale about the nature of fame and the often brutal business of Hollywood. Jaeckel never played the game. He simply did the work, believing his talent and dedication would be enough. And for a long time, it was. But in the end, an industry that values buzz over substance left him behind. He was a working-class hero in a town that worships royalty, and when his utility faded, so did its memory of him. But the Hollywood machine is not the final judge of a legacy. A legacy isn't written by executives, it's written in the hearts of the audience. And that is where Richard Jaeckel's story finds its redemption. His true legacy isn't in the quiet tragedy of his final years, but in the power and authenticity of his work. It lives on in the crackle of a dusty western on a late-night movie channel, and in the tense moments of a classic war film. It lives in the face of Sergeant Clyde Boren in The Dirty Dozen, a performance of such grounded authority that he was one of the few to survive the film's explosive finale. It lives in the heartbreaking vulnerability of Joe Ben Stamper in Sometimes a Great Notion, a role that proved his immense depth. His life was a testament to a different kind of success, not the fleeting glory of A-list stardom, but the enduring power of quiet strength and unwavering dedication. He may have been forgotten by the industry, but he is remembered by those who value authenticity, by the fans who continue to discover his work every day. The final chapter of his life is undeniably tragic. But it should not overshadow the 50 years of work that came before it. Richard Jaeckel was a quintessential American actor, tough, reliable, and real, and he made every film he was in better. That is a legacy that no amount of silence can ever truly erase.